They called me a mama's boy, and yeah, maybe I was, but I never thought it would come to this. My own mother, Judge Eleanor Vance, sitting on the bench, gavel in hand, presiding over the case that could ruin my life. The air in that courtroom was thick, not just with the usual dusty smell of old paper and stale coffee, but with something colder, sharper, like a broken pane of glass you could feel in your teeth. It all started, really, the moment the lawsuit landed. Not even a lawsuit yet, just a threat, a nasty letter from a lawyer that looked like it was written with a poisoned pen. But the real shock, the stomach-dropping, heart-stopping moment, was when I saw the assignment. The judge, my mom. You have to understand, my mom, Judge Vance, isn't just a judge. She's the judge, respected, feared, known for her ice-cold impartiality. Everyone called her the Ice Queen behind her back, but never to her face. She ran a tight ship, ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove, and never ever let emotion get in the way. Which was great for the justice system, I guess, but a nightmare for me right now. I remember getting the news. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a nervous man with perpetually sweaty palms, called me. His voice was a strangled whisper. "Alex," he said, "they've assigned Judge Vance to the case." I must have laughed. A hollow, choking sound. "No way," I told him. "That's crazy. Conflict of interest, right? She's my mom." He was silent for a long moment. "Alex," he repeated. "She recused herself once, briefly. But the court system, given the complexity and the lack of available judges for this specific type of case, overruled it. And she accepted." My jaw must have hit the floor. My own mother accepting to judge my case. The one where I was being sued for everything I owned, everything I had worked for, and probably for my future too. It was a mess, a spectacular public mess. The suit itself was complicated, revolving around a failed startup, a business partner who decided to stab me in the back, and a whole lot of missing money. My former best friend Leo was the one suing me. He claimed I mismanaged funds, that I basically stole from him, and he knew about my mom. Oh, he definitely knew. He was probably banking on it. The first day in court was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed whispers. I walked in trying to look confident, trying to act like this was just another Tuesday. But every cell in my body was screaming. The whispers started almost immediately. "That's him, Alex Miller, Judge Vance's son. The mama's boy." The label clung to me like a bad smell, following me everywhere. It had been with me since elementary school, really. I was always the kid whose mom was a lawyer, then a prosecutor, then a judge. The one who always had the perfectly packed lunch, the neatest homework, the most sensible shoes. Other kids had complained. Their parents were too busy. Mine was always almost aggressively there. When my mom walked in, the entire room stood. The gravitas she commanded was palpable. She looked straight ahead, not a flicker of recognition in her eyes when they passed over me. It was like she was looking through me or past me to the wall behind. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality. But I knew that face. I knew the slight tightening around her mouth that meant she was focused, that she was in judge mode. I had seen it countless times across the dinner table, when she was dissecting a case, or when I'd brought home a less than stellar report card. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The gavel hit the wood, a sharp crack that echoed in the silent room. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance presiding. I took my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Across the aisle, Leo smirked. He had that smug look, like he'd already won. "Alex," he whispered, "just breathe. Remember what we discussed. Focus on the facts. Facts. Right." How could I focus on facts when the woman who tucked me into bed at night was now sitting on a pedestal, about to decide if I was a criminal? The first motions were procedural, dry legal talk about deadlines and discovery. My mum's voice, usually warm and familiar when she told me to clean my room, was now crisp, formal, entirely devoid of emotion. She was a robot, a machine of justice. And for the first time, it didn't feel comforting. It felt terrifying. Every time she spoke, every time she looked down, I felt like she was dissecting me, piece by painful piece. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The journalists sketching in their pads, the public spectators whispering, the other lawyers in the room, all waiting for some crack in the facade. Some sign that the judge was just a mom and I was just her son. But there was none, not a single one. It was a perfect performance of impartiality. And that was the truly heartbreaking part right from the start. It wasn't just that she was judging me. It was that she was so good at it, so completely detached, that it felt like she was erasing me, erasing our entire relationship. In front of the whole world, the Mama's boy label, which used to be just a silly taunt, now felt like a brand. Burned into my skin, confirming to everyone that I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. And now, my own mom was proving them right by having to prove she wasn't helping me. It was a twisted, painful logic. I just sat there sweating, my hands clenched into fists, trapped in a courtroom, trapped in a public spectacle, and trapped in the shadow of my mother's unyielding judgment. This was going to be hell. The label? Mama's boy. It wasn't just some random insult thrown my way. It was a legacy. A heavy, complicated legacy. My dad died when I was 7. A car accident. Just like that, gone. One day he was there, teaching me how to tie my shoes with bunny ears. The next, he was a faded photograph on the mantelpiece. And it was just Mom and me. She was already a formidable lawyer back then, but after Dad died, she became even more so. It was like she poured all her grief, all her energy into her work and into me. Every single bit of it. She worked crazy hours, but she was always there. Always. I remember my friends' parents were often too busy for school plays or parent-teacher conferences. Not my mom. She was front row center, even if she had to take a power nap in the car beforehand. She taught me everything. How to study, how to debate, how to organize my thoughts. She didn't just help with homework. She'd turn it into a legal brief, dissecting Shakespeare like he was a witness on the stand. "What's his motive, Alex? What's the evidence?" she'd ask, peering over her glasses. It sounds intense, and it was, but it was also how we connect. Our shared language was logic, debate, and a fierce pursuit of truth, or at least her version of it. Other kids saw it. They saw the way she dropped me off every morning, even in middle school, when everyone else was walking or biking. They saw her volunteering at every school event, not just making cookies, but organizing the entire bake sale with spreadsheets and risk assessment. And they heard her voice booming from the sidelines during my pitiful attempts at soccer, cheering me on with legal precision. "Alex, observe the play. Anticipate the opposition's move." "Mama's boy," they'd whisper in the locker room. "Can't even pick his own clothes without his mom's approval." Or, "Does your mom argue all your fights for you, Alex?" It stung, of course it did. I'd try to push back, try to assert my independence. I'd deliberately wear mismatched socks or slouch in my chair, just to see if she'd notice. She always did. And she'd just give me that look, the one that said, "I know what you are doing and it's childish." In high school, it got worse. While other kids were sneaking out to parties, I was often at home, going over debate club notes with her, or discussing the latest Supreme Court ruling. Dates? Forget about it. The moment a girl found out my mom was the Judge Vance, they either got intimidated or thought I was some kind of freak. And then there was the inevitable, is your mom going to cross-examine me about my intentions? It was a running joke, but it was my life. Fast forward to the present. The lawsuit. It stemmed from Innovate Now, my tech startup. My brainchild, or so I thought. Leo and I had been friends since college. He was the charismatic one, the sales guy, the network. I was the tech wizard, the coder, the one who built the actual product. We were supposed to be the perfect team. We pitched our idea, a revolutionary AI-powered scheduling app, to investors. We got a lot of buzz, a lot of seed money. Things were looking up, but then the cracks started to show. Leo started spending more lavishly, less on the company, more on himself. There were discrepancies in the books, small at first, then growing. I confronted him. He denied everything, of course, said I was just being paranoid, that I didn't understand the flow of money in a startup. We argued. It got ugly. One day I walked in, and the servers were wiped, the office was empty, and Leo was gone, vanished, along with a good chunk of our investor money. I was devastated. I went to the police, but it was tricky. He hadn't outright stolen. He'd misallocated funds, hidden behind layers of shell companies and clever accounting tricks. It was a civil matter, they said, so I sued. I sued him for breach of contract, for fraud, for everything I could think of. I wanted justice. I wanted my life back. That's when Leo the snake turned it around. He counter-sued me. Claimed I was the one who mismanaged the funds. Claimed I was incompetent. And then he played his ace. He claimed I had an unfair advantage. That I had relied on my mother's influence to get investors, to secure contracts, to cover up my own mistakes. He even implied, though never outright stated, that my mom had somehow been involved in the initial investment rounds, using her name to smooth things over. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but it was a juicy narrative. The Momma'S boy and the judge. It was perfect for the media, and now here we were. Day 2 of the trial. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a dull ache in my chest. My mom, Judge Vance, was now questioning the selection of the jury. She was meticulous, asking probing questions, looking for any bias. Every time she looked at a potential juror, I wondered, does she see me when she looks at them? Does she see her son, the accused, the Momma'S boy? But her gaze was unwavering, professional. The whole thing felt like a sick joke. I had spent my entire life trying to prove I wasn't just Judge Vance's son, that I was Alex Miller, a smart, capable person. And now the biggest challenge of my life was unfolding, with my biggest obstacle and my biggest supporter rolled into one. It was a nightmare. And I knew deep down that no matter how this ended, my relationship with my mom, with myself, would never be the same. The trial was just beginning, but the heartbreak had already set in. The lawsuit, Leo Maxwell Vi. Alex Miller was a beast. Tangled mess of corporate finance, intellectual property, and a whole lot of personal animosity. Leo claimed I had mismanaged the seed funding for Innovate. Now that I had deliberately steered the company into the ground, and that I had absconded with a substantial portion of the initial investment. His legal team, led by Miss Davies, had crafted a narrative that painted me as incompetent, naive, and ultimately a thief. Core of their argument wasn't just about the numbers, it was about my character. It was about leveraging that Momma'S boy label, twisting it into something insidious. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was doing his best. He was a good man. Steady, if a little overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of Leo's claims and the public scrutiny. Alex. He'd said to me over a watery coffee in his office, "We need to show that you acted in good faith, that any financial issues were due to market volatility, or, frankly, Leo's own irresponsible spending, which we have evidence of. We also need to vigorously defend against this character assassination. It's unethical, but they're going for blood." The courtroom felt like a hostile environment. Every day the seats were a little fuller. Local news channels had picked up the story, "Judge's son on trial." It was a sensational headline, a delicious scandal for the public to devour. The first witness was an accountant hired by Leo's team. She spoke in dry technical terms, but the implication was clear. Money disappeared under my watch. Miss Davies led her through a series of questions, pointing to specific transactions, invoices, and bank statements. She made it sound like I was moving money into secret accounts, paying for lavish personal expenses. Every number she rattled off felt like a hammer blow. My mom, Judge Vance, sat there, impassive. She listened, occasionally scribbling notes, her gaze fixed on the witness. I watched her, desperate for some sign, any sign that she understood, that she believed me, but her face gave nothing away. When Miss Davies tried to introduce an email that subtly implied my mother's influence in securing an early investor, Mr. Henderson objected immediately. "Irrelevant, Your Honor, and highly prejudicial." My mom looked at Miss Davies, then at Mr. Henderson. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured. "The objection is sustained. Counsel, stick to the facts pertaining to the alleged financial mismanagement. This court will not tolerate character attacks disguised as evidence." A ripple went through the courtroom. A small victory, I thought. Maybe she was on my side just a little. But then I saw Miss Davies' small, knowing smile. She hadn't expected the email to get admitted. She just wanted the jury to hear about it, to plant the seed. And my mom's stern ruling, while technically correct, also served to highlight the very thing they wanted to draw attention to. It was a double-edged sword. She had maintained impartiality, but in doing so, she had also inadvertently spotlighted the very connection they wanted to exploit. The next few days were a blur of testimony. Investors, former employees, even my landlord from the old office space. Each one painted a piece of the picture, and Miss Davies was masterful at connecting the dots to create a narrative of my supposed incompetence and deceit. One witness, Sarah, a former intern, was particularly devastating. She was a quiet, shy girl, and I had always been kind to her. But on the stand, she seemed coached, robot. She testified about seeing me with large sums of cash, about me making erratic decisions, about a time I supposedly told her, "Don't worry, my mom can smooth anything over." It was a complete fabrication. I remember telling her not to worry about a minor office expense glitch, that I would handle it. I would never have said anything about my mom. My heart pounded as she spoke. I looked at my mom, the judge. Her eyes were fixed on Sarah. Did she believe it? Did she think I would ever say something like that? The betrayal from Sarah, someone I had genuinely tried to mentor, was a sharp, personal pain. Mr. Henderson cross-examined Sarah, trying to poke holes in her story, but she stuck to her script. "I am just telling the truth," she mumbled, avoiding my gaze. I knew Leo had gotten to her somehow, probably offered her money or threatened her. During a break, I cornered Mr. Henderson. "She's lying," I hissed. "I never said that. That's a complete fabrication." He nodded gravely. "I know, Alex, but it's her word against yours, and the jury heard it. That's the danger here. They're not just attacking the facts of the business. They're attacking you, Alex. They're trying to prove you are a spoiled, irresponsible kid who used his mother's name to get ahead and then blew it. I looked over at my mom, who was now having a brief, hushed conversation with her clerk. Completely oblivious to my internal turmoil, she was back to being the formidable Judge Vance, insulated by her robes and her gavel. It felt like she was a million miles away, even though she was just a few feet in front of me. The distance wasn't just physical, it was a vast emotional chasm. That night I tried to call her, just to talk, to hear her voice outside of the courtroom. It rang and rang. Finally, her assistant picked up. "The judge is unavailable, Mr. Miller. She's preparing for tomorrow's session. And ethically, she cannot discuss the ongoing case with you. You know that." I hung up, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. Ethically. Always ethically. I understood it intellectually. She had to be impartial. She had to be impartial, she had to. But emotionally it was a knife twist. It felt like she was choosing her job, her reputation, over her own son. And the worst part? I couldn't even blame her. This was the life she had chosen, the path she had forged after Dad died. This was her identity. And I was just collateral damage in her pursuit of justice. It was a cold, hard truth, and it was tearing me apart. The trial picked up speed, and so did the whispers. The local news had a field day. Judge's son accused of fraud, blared one headline. Another, even more galling read, "Is Mama's boy getting special treatment in court?" It was a sick joke. Special treatment. I felt like I was being slowly boiled alive. My social media, which I rarely checked, blew up. People I hadn't spoken to since high school were messaging me. Some with support, mostly with questions that felt like accusation. Strangers commented on news articles, speculating about my upbringing, my character, my mother's supposed favoritism. "Of course he's a mama's boy. Probably can't tie his own shoes," one read. Another, "He thinks he's above the law because his mommy's a judge." It stung worse than I could have imagined. Every insult felt like a confirmation of my deepest insecurity. I stopped going out. My few remaining friends, the ones who hadn't already distanced themselves, started to feel uncomfortable around me. Conversations would stall, or they'd veer uncomfortably towards the lawsuit. "So, how's the trial going?" they'd ask, their eyes darting around nervously. I could feel their judgment, or at least their pity, which sometimes felt worse. I tried to talk to Mom again, this time in person. I knew the rules, I knew the ethics, but I was desperate. I showed up at her chambers after court, unannounced. Her assistant looked startled, almost alarmed. "Mr. Miller," she stammered. "The judge is very busy. I just need 5 minutes." I pleaded, "Please." A moment later, Mom appeared at her office door. She was still in her robes, her face tired but resolute. "Alex," she said, her voice flat. Not angry, not soft, just neutral. The most terrifying sound in the world, right then. "Mom," I began, my voice cracking, "can we just talk? About anything. Not the case, just us. I feel like I am losing you." She sighed, a deep, weary sound. Her eyes, usually so sharp, looked distant. "Alex, you know I can't. Not now. Not during this. My impartiality must be beyond reproach. Any contact, any perceived favor could compromise the entire proceeding. It would be a disservice to the court, to the public, and frankly, to you. It would give your opponent grounds for appeal if you were to win, and it would undermine the integrity of the judiciary if you were to lose. Do you understand the implications?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "I do, Mom. But what about me? What about us? I feel like I am drowning and you are just standing there watching." Her jaw tightened, My duty is to the law, Alex, to justice, and sometimes that duty requires difficult sacrifices. You know I love you, but this is bigger than us right now. You need to trust Mr. Henderson. He is your advocate. And I will ensure a fair trial for both sides. She paused, then added, her voice barely above a whisper, "It's hard for me too, Alex. Harder than you know." And then she turned and went back into her office, closing the door softly but firmly behind her. The sound echoed in the empty hallway, a final, definitive click. It was heartbreaking, not because she didn't say "I love you," but because she said it as an afterthought, an obligation. After outlining her unwavering commitment to the law, it felt like her love was conditional, secondary to her professional duty. And perhaps it was. That night, I just stared at the ceiling. The distance between us was no longer just the courtroom. It was a vast, unbridgeable chasm of professional ethics and personal pain. She was the judge, and I was the accused. And for her, it seemed, the lines were drawn with absolute clarity. For me, they were a swirling, painful mess. The next day in court, Miss Davies hammered home the point. She brought up an old-school project, a model rocket, that Mom had supposedly helped me too much with. It was ridiculous. I had designed the rocket. She had just helped me with the calculations and the structural integrity. But Miss Davies made it sound like Mom had built the whole thing, and I had taken credit. It was a petty, vicious attack designed to prove my fundamental lack of independence. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to shut it down, but she just let it go. "Counsel, please stick to relevant matters," she said, almost as if she were bored. She didn't sustain the objection, didn't chastise Miss Davies for bringing up such a flimsy, irrelevant point. It was like she was allowing the character assassination to continue, perhaps to prove how impartial she truly was. Mr. Henderson objected again, more forcefully. "Your Honor, this is an attempt to malign my client's character, entirely unrelated to the matter at hand." My mom looked at him, her eyes unreadable. "Mr. Henderson, I understand your concern. However, the plaintiff is attempting to establish a pattern of behavior regarding the defendant's alleged over-reliance on external assistance in complex matters. While the example is anecdotal, I will allow a limited exploration for now. Move along, Miss Davies." I felt a cold dread spread through me. Limited exploration. She was allowing them to keep digging, to keep painting me as a helpless child. It was a small concession, but it felt like a massive betrayal. She was letting them chip away at my very identity, right there in her courtroom. And she was doing it in the name of fairness and impartiality. That's when it hit me. The deepest betrayal wasn't just the public scrutiny, or Leo's lies. It was the way my mother's unwavering commitment to her professional integrity was inadvertently, systematically dismantling my personal life, piece by painful piece. She was upholding the law, yes, but in doing so, she was crucifying me. And she was doing it with a poker face, utterly detached, a perfect judge. A perfect judge and a mother I no longer recognized. It was a bitter, unbearable truth. The opposing side's strategy became crystal clear: demolish my credibility by amplifying the Mama's boy narrative. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about proving I was inherently incapable, a puppet on strings, and that my mother's influence was the puppet master. They didn't need to prove she was actively involved in the fraud. They just needed to prove I was too weak, too reliant, too privileged to succeed on my own. Turning point, the real gut punch, came with the testimony of Dr. Aris Thorne. He was introduced as an expert witness, a behavioral psychologist specializing in family dynamics and dependence. I had never heard of him. He was a slick, impeccably dressed man with a calm, reassuring voice that masked a sharp, insidious agenda. Miss Davies led him through a series of hypothetical questions, cleverly crafted to mirror my own life. Doctor, in your expert opinion, what are the potential psychological effects on an individual raised primarily by a highly successful, dominant single parent, especially in a demanding profession like the law? Dr. Thorne paused, looked at the jury, and began to speak in measured tones. He talked about enmeshed family systems, delayed individuation, and dependency patterns. He used words like learned helplessness and unconscious manipulation. He never once mentioned my name or my mother's, but everyone in that courtroom knew exactly who he was talking about. He described a scenario where a child, constantly overseen and guided by a powerful parent, never develops true autonomy or self-reliance. Painted a picture of someone incapable of making independent decisions, prone to rash actions, and likely to lean on external figures for all their major life choices. It was horrifying. He was using psychological jargon to strip away every ounce of my self-worth, to explain away every struggle as a symptom of my dysfunctional upbringing. He made my relationship with my mom sound like a disease, a disability that rendered me incapable of running a business, let alone being held responsible for one. And doctor, Miss Davies continued, if such an individual were to enter a high-stakes business venture, reliant on complex financial decisions, what would be the likely outcome if they lacked true independent judgment? Dr. Thorne nodded gravely. Failure, often catastrophic, and a tendency to seek blame externally, to view themselves as victims, rather than taking personal accountability. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just my business being judged. It was my entire existence, my entire past. They were systematically dismantling who I was, based on a fabricated psychological profile. This wasn't about the money. This was about destroying me. Mr. Henderson jumped up, fuming. Objection, Your Honor. This is purely speculative and character assassination. Dr. Thorne has never examined my client. My mom. Judge Vance listened, her eyes narrowed slightly. She looked from Miss Davies to Dr. Thorne, then to Mr. Henderson. The courtroom held its breath. This was it. This was the moment she had to shut it down. This was beyond the pale. Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice even. Dr. Thorne is being asked for a hypothetical professional opinion. While I acknowledge the potentially prejudicial nature of the line of questioning, the court will allow the plaintiff to demonstrate a pattern of alleged behavior that speaks to the defendant's suitability for managing such complex ventures. The jury will be instructed to weigh the relevance of this testimony carefully. She didn't sustain the objection. She let it stand. She let them tear me apart, piece by piece, under the guise of hypothetical professional opinion. Her words were like a physical blow. A small, cold part of me died in that moment. I looked at her, searching for any flicker of emotion, any sign of a mother's pain, a mother's protection. But her face was a steel mask. She was Judge Vance, not Mom. She was impartial, utterly, terrifyingly impartial. And her impartiality felt like the deepest betrayal of all. During the cross-examination, Mr. Henderson tried to expose Dr. Thorne as a charlatan, or at least biased. He asked about the doctor's fees, about his previous expert testimonies, trying to imply he was a hired gun. Dr. Thorne remained calm, unflappable, spewing more jargon about his unbiased clinical observations. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a trial about money. It was a trial about my worth as a human being. And my own mother, the woman who had nurtured me, guided me, and yes, perhaps overprotected me, was now allowing the world to tear me down, all in the name of justice. That night, I didn't even try to call her. What would be the point? She had made her choice. Her career, her reputation, her absolute, unyielding adherence to the letter of the law, that was paramount. And I, her son, was simply a case number, a litigant in her courtroom, to be treated with the same cold, distant impartiality as any other stranger. The heartbreak wasn't a sudden shattering blow. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. Day after day, as the person I knew as my mother receded further and further behind the impenetrable facade of Judge Eleanor Vance. The Momma'S boy was being utterly destroyed, not by the accusations of a greedy ex-friend, but by the very hand that once held his. The pressure on my mother, Judge Vance, was immense. I saw it, even through the fog of my own despair. The media attention was relentless, not just on my case, but on her handling of it. Legal ethics committees were undoubtedly watching. Every ruling she made, every word she uttered was scrutinized for even a hint of favoritism. And she responded by becoming even more unyielding, even more like the Ice Queen everyone called her. I noticed the subtle changes. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper, her shoulders a little more hunched when she thought no one was looking. She often ate lunch alone in her chambers, not even joining the other judges. I heard snippets of conversations in the hallways, other lawyers and court staff whispering about the Vance case and how tough it must be for her. But no one dared to voice direct sympathy, not in the formal, rigid atmosphere of the courthouse. One afternoon, a crucial piece of evidence came up. It was an email from Leo to an investor, dated just weeks before he vanished. In it, he vaguely hinted at diversifying personal assets, using company funds, and mentioned securing a future away from this sinking ship. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was damning circumstantial evidence that he knew things were going south and was planning to jump ship, possibly with company money. Mr. Henderson was ecstatic. "Your Honor, this email clearly shows the plaintiff's intent to defraud the company. It undermines his entire claim that Mr. Miller was responsible for the financial instability." Miss Davies, however, immediately objected. "Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay." And this email was not properly disclosed during discovery. "We never saw this." She was furious, her face red. She knew this email could turn the tide. My mom picked up the email, her gaze scanning the text. She looked at the date, then at the chain of custody. "Mr. Henderson," she asked, her voice sharp, "where did this email originate? And why was it not provided to the plaintiff's counsel during discovery?" Mr. Henderson stammered. "Your Honor, it was just uncovered. We found it in a corrupted backup file from an old server. It was inaccessible until recently. We are providing it now, as soon as we could verify its authenticity." Miss Davies scoffed. "Convenient discovery, Your Honor. This is clearly a last-minute attempt to introduce evidence that wasn't properly disclosed. It's prejudicial and should be excluded." The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. This was a critical moment. If the email was admitted, it could be a huge blow to Leo's case. If it was excluded, we'd lose a valuable piece of counter-evidence. Everyone including me, held their breath, waiting for her decision. My mom leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning the room, then settling on the email once more. She paused, a long, agonizing silence. "Miss Davies, while the late discovery of this document is concerning, the court will review its authenticity and chain of custody. However," she continued, looking directly at Mr. Henderson, "the email does appear to contain elements that could be considered highly prejudicial if not properly authenticated, and if its relevance to the core allegations is not definitively established." Then she dropped the bombshell. "Given the sensitivity of this case, and to avoid any perception of unfair advantage due to the proximity of the parties, I will rule as follows. The email is provisionally admitted. but its full weight will only be considered if Mr. Henderson can provide an independent, third-party forensic analysis confirming its origin, integrity, and the exact date it became retrievable. This analysis must be provided within 24 hours. Failure to do so will result in its exclusion from evidence. A collective gasp went through the room. 24 hours? An independent forensic analysis of a corrupted backup file. That was almost impossible to get in such a short time frame. She was making it incredibly difficult. Mr. Henderson looked shell-shocked. Your Honor, 24 hours is an impossible deadline. Such a comprehensive analysis takes days, even weeks. My mom's gaze hardened. Mr. Henderson, this court operates on strict timelines. If the evidence is as crucial as you claim, then its authenticity should be verifiable. The court must ensure due process and prevent the introduction of questionable evidence. The ruling stands. We will adjourn for the day. Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. The gavel came down with a thud that echoed like a death knell. She had ruled against me, or at least made it incredibly difficult for me. She had chosen the stricter, more difficult path, ensuring that her impartiality was beyond reproach, even if it meant sacrificing a potentially crucial piece of my defense. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a familiar, cold despair. She hadn't been swayed by the emotional weight, by the injustice of it all. She had simply applied the rules, the strictest interpretation of them, to ensure that no one could accuse her of favoring her son. I wanted to scream, to rail against her, to demand to know why she was doing this to me. But I knew the answer. She was doing her job. She was being the judge. And in that moment, the mother I knew seemed to have vanished entirely, replaced by an unyielding embodiment of the law. It was her burden, yes, but it was my pain, and it felt like she was deliberately inflicting it, just to prove a point. Her duty was indeed to the law, and that duty felt like it was crushing me. That night was a blur of frantic phone calls. Mr. Henderson was pulling his hair out. He called every forensic IT specialist he knew. Most laughed, saying 24 hours was absurd. A couple offered to start the process, but there was no way to get a full certified report by morning. I sat in my apartment staring at the walls. The image of my mom's unyielding face burned into my mind. She was so determined to prove she wasn't biased that she was actively hurting my case. It felt like she was punishing me for simply being her son. But then something shifted. A different kind of anger began to bubble up, hot and urgent. Not just anger at Leo or Miss Davies, but a fierce, desperate anger at the situation itself, at being made to feel helpless, at being reduced to a caricature. I had spent my whole life trying to escape the Mama's boy label. And here it was, being weaponized against me, with my own mother seemingly aiding the process by her rigid impartiality. Number not anymore. I wasn't going to just sit there and let them tear me apart. I wasn't going to just let my mom's impartiality pave the way for my ruin. I had to fight, not just for the case, but for myself, for my name, for my future. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice shaky but firm, we need a new strategy. If we can't use that email, we have to find something else, something undeniable. He looked at me surprised. Alex, what are you thinking? Leo's weaknesses, I said, pacing my small living room. He's arrogant, he's careless. There has to be something. He wasn't always smart about covering his tracks. He was just quick. I remembered something. A throwaway comment Leo had made early on, when we were still friends, still dreaming big. He had joked about using a burner phone for some personal stuff, saying he was too important for traceable call. It was a silly, casual remark at the time, but now it clicked. Leo was obsessed with privacy, almost paranoid about leaving a digital footprint, but he was also lazy and incredibly vain. His phone, I blurted out. He loved his phones. He always had the latest model, even when we were broke, and he always took photos even of stupid stuff, just to show off. Mr. Henderson looked skeptical. Alex, we've gone through all his digital footprints that we could legally access. Nothing there. Not his main phone, I insisted. He had a secondary phone, a cheap burner or something he used for personal business. He mentioned it once, ages ago. He liked to keep his business separate from his life. And he was always bragging about how he had the best secure messaging apps, the ones that left no trace. We started digging. We went through old social media posts of Leo's, looking for any clue, any hint of a second device. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. We pulled up old photos he'd posted, zoomed in on backgrounds on his hand. Nothing. Days were ticking by. Then I remembered something else. An old shared photo from a conference, taken by another friend, months before everything went south. Leo was in the background, talking animatedly on a phone. It wasn't his usual sleek, expensive model. This one was chunkier, older, almost like a relic, and it had a distinctive bright orange case. That's it. I practically shouted, pointing at the grainy image on the screen. That's the burner. He used to joke about it, said it was old school, but untraceable. Mr. Henderson's eyes widened. If we can prove he had a secondary undisclosed device, especially one he used for untraceable communication, that's a whole new ballgame. It suggests intent to conceal, but how to prove it? We couldn't just subpoena his phone. He'd probably destroyed it. Unless Leo's arrogance, he loved to show off, even his secret stuff. He had posted a picture of his minimalist desk setup a few months before the split, and in the corner, almost hidden, was a blurry image of a charging cable plugged into something orange. A glimpse, a breadcrumb. We needed a witness, someone who could testify to seeing him use it, or someone who could confirm his secretive communication habits. It was a long shot. But I was done being a victim. I was done with the Momma'S boy label defining me. I was going to fight back, with or without my mother's help. The shift in my mindset was palpable. I started sitting taller in court, meeting Miss Davies's gaze, not flinching. I was still terrified, still heartbroken by the chasm between my mom and me. But now there was a fire. I was channeling all that pain and frustration into a singular focus, exposing Leo for the liar he was. This wasn't just about my innocence anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about proving, not to the world, but to myself, that I was Alex Miller, capable and strong, not just the judge's son. This was my fight, and I was finally ready to stand on my own 2 feet and face it head on. The trial hurtled towards its climax. My initial anger had solidified into a cold, determined resolve. I was no longer just a passive participant. I was a fighter. Mr. Henderson, seeing my newfound fire, was energized. We had spent countless hours digging, not just through financial records, but through old photos, social media posts, and even Leo's forgotten online forum discussion. The burner phone lead was a gamble, but it was our best shot. We found an old college acquaintance, Ben, who Leo had briefly tried to recruit into Innovate Now. Ben was a nervous, quiet guy, but he was honest. He testified that Leo had shown him a secret phone, a cheap, clunky orange one, boasting about how he used it for off-the-record conversations, particularly with potential investors, who preferred discretion. It was flimsy, but it opened a door. Miss Davies tried to rip Ben apart on cross-examination, questioning his memory, his motives, his very presence in court. I just remember it because Leo was so proud of how clever he was. He showed it to me like it was some kind of spy gadget. It wasn't a knockout punch, but it introduced doubt. "My mom," Judge Vance observed with her usual stoicism. I still couldn't read her, but her gaze seemed to linger on Ben for a moment longer than usual. Was it concern, or just intense scrutiny? The real confrontation, the one I had been dreading and yearning for, came when Leo took the stand for his cross-examination. He was confident, arrogant, still playing the wrong victim. He started by reiterating his claims, painting me as the villain, the one who squandered everything. Mr. Henderson started methodically, chipping away at Leo's financial claims, his spending habits. He produced receipts, bank statements, all pointing to Leo's own extravagant lifestyle, often paid for with company funds disguised as travel expenses or client entertainment. Leo squirmed but largely deflected, blaming me for poor oversight. Then it was my turn. I had insisted on speaking, on addressing Leo directly through my lawyer. My voice was shaky at first, but it gained strength as I continued. "Leo," I said, looking him straight in the eye, ignoring Miss Davies's protest that I addressed the court. "My mom didn't stop me. Do you remember the night before you vanished? When you told me you were going to diversify personal assets and find a future away from this sinking ship?" Leo's face went pale. "I don't recall saying that, Alex. You are mistaken." "You don't recall," I pressed on, my voice rising. "Or you are lying. Because you said it." To my face. "You planned this, didn't you? You drained the accounts, you wiped the servers, and you ran." Miss Davies was on her feet. "Objection, speculation. Your Honor, the defendant is making accusations, not asking questions." My mom, Judge Vance, listened. She looked from me to Leo, then at Miss Davies. Her eyes were piercing. "Mr. Miller, please phrase your questions appropriately. Mr. Henderson, keep your client in check." But she didn't strike my words from the record. She let them hang in the air, allowing the raw emotion, the accusation, to be heard by the jury. It was a small victory, but it felt immense. Mr. Henderson, catching my drift, picked up the thread. "Mr. Maxwell, did you not state to Mr. Miller that you intended to diversify personal assets and find a future away from this sinking ship?" Leo hesitated, glancing at Miss Davies, who looked furious. I may have used some colorful language, perhaps metaphorical, about the stress of the business. It was a difficult time for everyone. "Metaphorical?" I interjected, stepping slightly forward. "You vanished. You wiped our data. You stole from our investors and you left me to take the fall." Miss Davies exploded. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. The defendant is out of order." The courtroom erupted into a low murmur. My mom's gavel hit the wood, a sharp, authoritative crack. "Order! Order! Order in the court." Her voice was steel. "Mr. Miller, one more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. Mr. Henderson, control your client." But then she looked at Leo, her gaze piercing. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice slow and deliberate, "you are under oath. Did you at any point intend to defraud your investors or your business partner, Mr. Miller?" Leo squirmed. He looked trapped. He swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor. I always acted in the best interest of the company, and Mr. Miller was simply incompetent." "Your Honor," Mr. Henderson jumped in, sensing the opening. "I have a final question for Mr. Maxwell." "Mr. Maxwell, do you recall owning a secondary mobile device? Specifically a clunky phone with an orange case, which you used for what you referred to as off-the-record communications. Leo's eyes widened. He froze. His face drained of all color. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Miss Davies's jaw dropped. Objection. She finally managed to blurt out, but it was weak, almost an afterthought. My mom's gaze was fixed on Leo, unblinking. She didn't acknowledge the objection immediately. She waited. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Leo looked like a deer in headlights. "Mr. Maxwell?" my mom prompted, her voice deceptively soft, but with an underlying current of menace. "You are under oath. Answer the question." Leo opened. He looked around the courtroom, as if searching for an escape. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He was cornered. And for the first time I felt a surge of something akin to hope. My mom had let me have my moment. She had let Leo expose himself. This wasn't a win yet, but it was a crack in the dam. Confrontation I'd needed. The moment of truth had finally arrived. And it felt like my mom, the judge, had finally, subtly, given me a fighting chance. The silence in the courtroom stretched, thick and suffocating. Leo, trapped in my mother's unyielding gaze, finally broke. He looked away down at his hands, fiddling with the edge of the witness stand. I don't recall," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. It was the same evasion he'd used before, but this time, it sounded like a confession. My mom didn't press him further on the phone directly. She knew the damage was done. The implication hung heavy in the air. Leo was hiding something. The "don't recall" was a lie. Her eyes, however, seemed to hold a flicker of something new as she looked at me. Perhaps a glimmer of understanding, or maybe just a professional acknowledgement of a well-placed question. The trial moved into closing arguments. Miss Davies gave a blistering summary, reiterating every shred of evidence against me, painting me as a negligent, spoiled Momma'S boy who mismanaged a company into the ground, and then tried to blame his innocent partner. She hammered home the psychological testimony, the supposed pattern of dependence. Her final words were a direct appeal to the jury's sense of fairness, implying that I was trying to leverage my mother's position to escape justice. Then it was Mr. Henderson's turn. He focused on the facts, the financial discrepancies caused by Leo, the lack of transparency, the sudden disappearance. He highlighted Leo's evasiveness on the stand, the burner phone testimony, painting a picture of a calculated fraud. He spoke about my hard work, my dedication to the product, my attempts to salvage the company. He humanized me, something Miss Davies had worked so hard to strip away. He ended with a plea for true justice, not sensationalism, not personal vendettas. The jury went into deliberation. The waiting was excruciating. Every minute felt like an hour. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept replaying every moment of the trial, every cold glance from my mother, every smug smirk from Leo. After 2 days, the jury returned. The bailiff announced their presence. My heart leaped into my throat. My mum, Judge Vance, entered, her face as inscrutable as ever. But I thought I saw a slight tremor in her hand as she picked up the verdict form. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreman replied. "Will the foreman please read the verdict?" The foreman stood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. She unfolded the paper. "In the case of Maxwell v. Miller, regarding the claim of breach of contract and fraud, we find, for the plaintiff, Leo Maxwell, on the count of breach of contract." My stomach dropped. A loss. Just like that. The room blurred. I felt a wave of crushing despair. "However," the foreman continued, We find for the defendant Alex Miller on the count of fraud. Wait, what? I blinked. A partial victory? A partial loss? My head spun. The foreman explained the breakdown. The jury found I was liable for a certain amount of the financial loss due to negligent oversight in managing the company's books. A sum that was still substantial but not ruinous. But they had cleared me of the more serious charge of fraud. Leo would get some money, but I wouldn't have a criminal record, and my name wouldn't be irrevocably tarnished as a thief. It was a mixed verdict, a compromise. My mom looked at the jury, her expression unreadable. She thanked them for their service, then dismissed them. Courtroom erupted into a cacophony of whispers and camera flashes. Miss Davies looked furious. Leo looked stunned and angry. Mr. Henderson gripped my shoulder, a small, tired smile on his face. "Not perfect, Alex," he murmured, "but we avoided the worst of it. The fraud charge was the real danger. They believed you weren't a thief." I just nodded, my mind reeling. I had won, in a way. I hadn't lost everything. But it felt hollow. I was still responsible for a significant amount of money. My reputation was still bruised, and the Momma'S boy narrative, though perhaps less damning without the fraud conviction, still lingered. My mom's gaze swept over the courtroom, and for a fleeting second it met mine. There was no warmth, no relief, no motherly pride, just that same cold impartiality. She gave a curt nod to her clerk, gathered her papers, and walked out. Her back ramrod straight, without a single glance back. That night she didn't call. I didn't expect her to. The verdict, in its cold, precise impartiality, was her final, devastating act of judicial duty. She had proven to the world that she could rule against her own son, that she valued justice, or at least the appearance of it, above all else. She had maintained her integrity as a judge. But in doing so, she had solidified the distance between us, perhaps forever. I sat in my quiet apartment, the weight of the verdict heavy on me. I wasn't ruined, not completely, but the cost was immense. My relationship with my mother, once the bedrock of my life, now felt like a fragile, broken thing. She had sacrificed us for the sake of her gavel, and the heartbreak of that sacrifice felt heavier than any financial burden. I had survived the trial, but at what price? Weeks bled into months. The dust settled, but the scars remained. Financially, I was in a tough spot. Partial judgment meant I had to liquidate assets, scale back my life significantly. Innovate Now was dead, buried under the weight of the lawsuit and the betrayal. The Momma'S boy label, while not as fiercely debated, still lingered in hushed tones, especially in professional circles. I struggled to find new work, facing wary glances and polite rejections. My relationship with my mother was the biggest casualty. We spoke occasionally, formal, stiff conversations. She'd ask about my job hunt, about my well-being, always with that precise, measured tone. There was no warmth, no shared laughter, no comfortable silences. It was like talking to a stranger who knew my history. I tried to bridge the gap once after a particularly bad day. "Mom," I ventured, "that trial, it really changed things between us, didn't it?" Her voice ever so slightly softened. "Alex, my duty was clear. I had to uphold the law. Any deviation, any perceived bias would have shattered everything I built. It would have jeopardized the entire judicial system's trust. But what about us?" I asked, my voice raw. "What about your son?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I love you, Alex," she finally said, her voice strained. "You know that. But some things are bigger than personal feelings. You have to understand that. And then..." She changed the subject. asking about a job interview I had lined up. It was clear. The wall was still there, built of ethics and duty, and I couldn't tear it down. The old relationship, the one where she was my fiercely protective mom, was gone. Broken. And that was the true heartbreak of it all. I hit rock bottom, isolated, financially strained, and emotionally gutted. But then a strange thing happened. With nothing left to lose, something new began to grow within me. Independence. Not the kind she had always pushed me towards, but a fierce, hard-won independence forged in the fires of public humiliation and personal loss. I stopped trying to escape the Mama's boy label. Instead, I started to redefine it. Maybe I was a mama's boy. My mom was a brilliant, formidable woman who had taught me grit, logic, and the importance of standing up for what's right. If people wanted to call me that, fine. But I was no longer defined by it as a weakness. I was defined by how I picked myself up after being knocked down. I started taking on freelance tech jobs, smaller projects, working from a tiny co-working space. I networked not with grand promises but with quiet competence. I built something new from the ground up, entirely on my own. No investor pitches, no grand partners, just me and my skills. It was slow, hard work, but for the first time in my life, it felt truly mine. I moved into a smaller apartment, got rid of most of my possessions. The freedom of having less was liberating. I started running, pushing my physical limits, finding a new kind of mental clarity in the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement. One day, months after the trial, I was volunteering at a local community tech workshop, teaching coding to underprivileged kids. I felt genuinely happy, fulfilled in a way I hadn't been when chasing venture capital dreams. As I was packing up, a young girl no older than 10 approached me, her eyes wide. "Are you Alex Miller?" she asked. "My mom says you are Judge Vance's son. She says your mom is super smart." I smiled. "Yeah," I said, "that's me. And yeah, she is." "And you built a company, right? And you are teaching us to code?" she asked, her voice full of awe. "That's right," I told her. "I build things, and I teach." She beamed. "Cool." "My mom said you are a really good builder." In that moment, it didn't sting. It didn't feel like a label of dependence. It felt like a connection. It felt like a connection. It felt like a new beginning. My mom and I still have that distance. It might never fully close. The scar tissue of the trial is thick. But I understand her now, not just as a judge, but as a person who made an incredibly hard choice. A choice she truly believed was necessary. And while it broke my heart, it also, paradoxically, made me. I am still figuring things out, but I am standing on my own 2 feet. And for the first time in my life, I am not running from the shadow of Judge Eleanor Vance. I am building my own light. And if some people still want to call me a mama's boy, well, maybe they're right. But it's my version of a mama's boy. The one who got knocked down, but got back up, and built something new all by himself. And that, in its own way, is the greatest victory of all.